Okay, so Jill, great to have you back on the show. There's so much to talk about, so we're, of course, as always, just going to jump right into it.
Thank you, Michael. I'm so glad to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. If you or I had said and done what Trump has done to disrupt his various court cases, we would have had our bond revoked and we'd be held until trial. Having dealt with Nixon, who also felt that he was above the law, do you think it's right that Trump is still walking free?
Well, let me say there's a big difference. Nixon said if the president does it, it's not illegal by definition. He definitely set the tone for the president is above the law and that the ends justify the means. But he didn't get away with it. And ultimately, he obeyed the subpoena. He obeyed a court order. Donald Trump does not, has not, and likely will not. I've never met him, so I can't say from personal knowledge, but if past is prologue, if history repeats itself, or even rhymes, he will continue to violate the gag order. He will continue to do, as Rudy Giuliani has done, he can't stop himself from redefaming the two people he's on trial at this very moment for defaming. And he goes outside the courtroom and he says, well, everything I said was true. Oh my God, it's already been ruled a lie.
You're right. And I do know Donald, and he truly does not care. But what bothers me about that whole issue, I would love to have seen, for example, Judge Engoron extend the gag order to witnesses. Now, of course, whoever the defense witnesses, Donald's not going to attack them, right? For example, he's got this one witness, Eli Bartov, who's a new NYU, I don't know, accounting expert or whatever he is.
A practice expert.
Yes, a practice
without
expert.
practice, yeah.
If you listen to Trump talk about him, it's very reminiscent of the way he used to talk about me in 2017 when he'd have these rallies or these different money making sort of lunches and dinners, and he'd praise me. Is Michael Cohen there? Is Michael in the room? Michael's a great guy. He's a great friend. He's a brilliant lawyer. He loves television, yada, 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 right? He goes on like what he's doing with this guy Bartov. But God forbid you tell the truth. Let me tell you, this is what you get. This is what the guy actually posted. Don't forget, in addition to everything else in the fake and fraudulent case that Peekaboo has brought against me, their so-called star and only witness, sleazebag and disbarred former lawyer Michael Cohen admitted in court to repeatedly lying under oath. It was a total breakdown, a non-recoverable Perry Mason moment. That alone ends the Biden-driven witch hunt, election interference. Now, in 7 lines, I think you have 30 lies that are there. 30. I mean, it's really amazing. First of all, it's not a fake case. It's not a fraudulent case. Her name is not Peekaboo. That's, of course, a derogatory term that he's using to our incredible Attorney General, Tish James. I am not the star and only witness. So now you're up to 5. I'm far from a sleazebag. I am disbarred, so he's right about that. He's got my name right. I never admitted to in court to repeatedly lying under oath. They take it out of context. And this is the whole thing with Trump. I wish that Judge Engoron would have expanded the gag order, not just to his staff, but also to witnesses. Don't you think that they should be protecting witnesses as well? Because truth be told, if I had a time machine and I could look back and see exactly what happens to me today because of these posts, I'm telling you right now, I wouldn't cooperate because the hate that I am receiving, the attacks that I am getting on a daily basis, it's overwhelming. It's not just overwhelming, Jill, pardon my French, it's fucking exhausting. It shreds your heart. It destroys your soul. It fucks with your mind. I wouldn't do it. And I don't care, subpoena, non-subpoena. I love the fact that he's taking care of his law clerk. But what about me? What about other witnesses?
Has your lawyer ever inquired about it? Because it is not uncommon to protect witnesses, jurors, and court staff obviously needed it because she was and has been and continues to be attacked.
Me too.
His lawyers are attacking her.
Me
so
too.
It's continuing. I certainly agree with you that it is not only not uncommon, but it would be wise to protect witnesses for their role as witnesses. The reason that this has been tricky is because witnesses, particularly in other cases, are people who are political opponents, either running against him. I mean, for example, Mike Pence was at one time a candidate in the primary, Republican primaries to be president. And so you can't bar Trump from saying he has bad policies, he's a bad person, he shouldn't be your nominee. But when it comes to you, I don't think there's any particular reason why you would be outside the parameters, why any First Amendment right that Donald Trump has, because remember, he is two different people. He is a candidate for president and a former president. Maybe it's three different people. He's a former president, a candidate for future president, but he is also a legitimate criminal defendant. And criminal defendants have different sets of rights, lesser than other people. And as a criminal defendant, you are correct that if someone violated the rules of court, they would be penalized. And it wouldn't be 5,000 here and 10,000 there. And then he would continue to reiterate the things that caused him to do that. They would be jailed. They would be, even if it was home detention rather than being in a jail cell. And it is tricky. I mean, you would certainly admit that when someone is running as president, it appears political no matter what you do, even though we have said a million times, look what happened to Bankman-Fried.
Yep.
He was put in jail. Well, he's a criminal defendant, and that's what happens when you do something that violates the terms of your release. You get unreleased. You get incarcerated. So I agree. He's being treated better than other people, and that is wrong from our standards of justice in America.
You know, Jill, I tell you, I'm on the telephone with my father. And he's retired head and neck reconstructive surgeon there in the Florida area, enjoying playing cards and golf, the whole bit. And he calls me up as Trump is heading to Georgia in order to get his mugshot. I'm not sure if it was mugshot 2, number 3, and number 4, whatever it was. And my father says to me, is this a nominee for the presidency? Is this just a guy who's running? Is this a king? I've never seen anything like it. He goes, there's 30 motorcycle police officers, followed by a whole slew of police cars, followed by an ambulance, by a fire truck, and a bunch then of more motorcycles, police officers. And they shut down the roads, and they're driving him straight through there, and then he gets out and he starts waving to the camera. It's almost like you would think that he's like a conquering king that just returned home. No, he was going in for a mugshot. And my father jokingly turns around and says to me, I'm not sure I remember that that's how it worked for you. So I said, because Pop, that's not how it worked for me. I said, I took the subway, I went in, and then I took the subway back like the common people do, not like the king. I mean, he rolled up like a rock star. He rolled up like a king or a monarch or the Fuhrer. It's really wrong. And that's one of the reasons why there are still so many MAGA supporters. They see this, and they see this as, I hate to say it, as a win for Trump over the system. Because in my opinion, it is. He should have sat, and look, he has Secret Service protection. That's his right as a former president. I'm not sure he gets to keep it if he gets indicted. That's never been tested before. But sit in a car with your Secret Service like everybody else in traffic. And when you get there, find a spot, put money in the meter, make sure that you have enough, otherwise you're going to get a parking ticket. Go inside and be treated the same as every other person who's charged that's required to go in. That's just the way I see it. Instead, there's this hand-holding, there's this glorification of his criminal acts.
Well, I see it a little differently, or have a different solution. And part of that is the media should not be covering from the time he leaves Mar-a-Lago to get on his plane, to following the flight, to landing the plane, to getting the motorcade into the courtroom. He does get, and particularly at least until he's convicted, and maybe even after he's convicted. I mean, it is definitely untested as to what would happen if he were convicted and sentenced, other than to home confinement, what would happen. But the media does not have to cover it. I was nauseated the first time it happened, and I turned it off the second time. I don't think that it's appropriate to make him look like a conquering hero going to court. That's just wrong. And he doesn't have to have the media scrum after he comes out of court where he can say anything he wants and it gets portrayed. And you're right, it is a fundraising methodology for him where he says this and his people send him money to keep him out of harm's way. That is absurd that it happens, and it's absurd that the press keeps covering it. The coverage is simply not fair. It's the same thing. He makes more gaffes than Joe Biden. If Joe Biden says anything that's a slight mistake, he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, let's go on." Trump pretends like he never did it, but the press covers anything that Biden says as if it was major news and ignores all the things that Trump does. And if you're going to report one, you have to report both. And so I would say press coverage is partly responsible for the misimpression that people have. And the best antidote to all this is to get the trial done, and done quickly. And there are some hurdles right now being presented in court that could cause an delay. And at some point, it gets too close to the election. And this needs to be resolved before the nomination, but certainly before the election. So I just think we need to do a lot in terms of the system of justice and the media reporting of it.
Yeah, totally agree. You know, with the case that's going on right now, the New York civil fraud trial, the $250 million base fraud trial, today they finished with defense witness Bartov. And I was blown away when one of the reporters contacted me right after they finished at 12:30 in the afternoon. It appears that government has two rebuttal witnesses that they want to bring in. And there was a whole back and forth that went on. And Goron, who I actually think is really a fantastic judge, having sat in the witness chair in his court, I really do. I think he's very fair, despite what Trump wants to say. January, I think, 5th?
11th.
They're coming back for these two rebuttal, and I think summation is on the 15th of January. Now, this is really scary because that's just the civil fraud trial. That's another 30 days of a delay in terms of getting that case finished. And the reason I say that is either the Jack Smith case or the Alvin Bragg case will be starting in March. I don't believe that Engoron may have the decision to that case before the next case starts, assuming that Trump already doesn't. I mean, look, it brings me to my next question. The Supreme Court.
Well, let me interrupt you for a second, because E. Jean Carroll's case is going to start in January.
Yeah, but E. Jean's case is a simple one because Donald's not even showing up. It's merely, did he say what he said? And are they going to smack him with an additional defamation claim?
Well, basically, the New York civil fraud case is also already decided that he did commit fraud.
Right.
Not that he is a fraud, even though that's what he keeps saying. It's that he committed fraud, that he submitted fraudulent papers. And it's only a question of what are the damages. And the same is true in the E. Jean Carroll case, where it's how much damage did she suffer for the second one, not just in terms of actual damages, but how much punitive damages should be assessed to stop him from doing it a third time. Because obviously, the huge set amount that she was awarded in case number one didn't stop him from immediately repeating the falsehoods that got him convicted in the first one. So it is just a question of damages in both. But I'm just saying, in terms of scheduling, what comes next? E. Jean Carroll comes next. And I have not read as of yet why the final summation has been put off so long.
Yeah, I don't know. They wanted longer. Trump's defense team wanted even longer.
Well,
hey, Jill, could we play a quick game?
Sure.
How much do you think that the judge is going to award in punitive damages to E. Jean?
Well, it might have been more, but since the ask was only $250 million, that's the minimum.
No, that's the civil. That's the civil fraud. I'm talking E. Jean.
I'm sorry. You mean in E. Jean?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I missed the question. E. Jean is going to be more than $1 billion. It has to be, because she was immediately defamed. Well, it's certainly going to be a couple million at least, more than the last one.
So I think the last one was what, 5 million?
5 million, and that's why I said $1 billion is not. You said no, but really, is it no when it's the second time and 5 million did not stop him? No, yeah. I mean, if 5 doesn't stop him, will 10? I don't think so. It's going to have to be something that isn't preposterous, but it is, is 50 million enough? And will he easily raise that from his supporters? He might. So it doesn't actually cost him anything to keep this up.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah,
it is. Of course, it's crazy.
So I'll give you my belief. I think the judge is going to take the $5 million that was awarded the first time, and then they're just going to do treble damages. They'll award an additional $15 million. And here's what the judge is going to say. Again, because he'll appeal that like he appealed the first one. And the judge will say treble damages in this specific instance is punitive, because that's what generally they'll award. But the purpose of awarding the treble damages, the punies, if you do it again, we're now going to take that amount and we're going to treble damage it again. So be forewarned, be guided by your action, that your actions have consequences, Mr. Former President. But Jill, if I can just go back to the question I wanted to
remember,
ask.
He's going to have to post that amount in order to appeal. He posted the 5 to appeal. He would have to post 15 more to appeal the second time.
Exactly. So the Supreme Court granted Jack Smith's motion to promptly decide if a president can commit all crimes, past and present and future, with absolute immunity. And Smith's strategy was used by the government in the case of United States versus Nixon to expedite the appellate timeline. Of course, you were there. How were the two cases similar?
Well, We subpoenaed for trial 64 additional tapes, and we did that April 16th. Mid-May, it was decided that we were right. In July, we argued in the Supreme Court. We did skip the Court of Appeals. The district court ruled that we had a right to the tapes, and we knew it was going to end up in the Supreme Court, so we applied to the Supreme Court to take it. They canceled their summer recess in order to hear the arguments, and they decided within days of hearing the argument, and within days of that, Richard Nixon resigned because the tape was what became known as the smoking gun tape that absolutely proved that he had knowledge and that he was part of the obstruction. How is it different? That was a case of a subpoena for documents, tapes, but basically documents, a subpoena for evidence to be used in a trial, which is different than does he have immunity for the underlying crime, as opposed to does he have a responsibility as an American citizen, which as former president he is, but he was still sitting president. So number one, Nixon was the sitting president. Donald Trump is the former president. The rights of a sitting president are different, but the right of a sitting president to ignore a subpoena had already been determined, but not by the Supreme Court. It had been determined that we had a right to the tapes, the first 9 tapes we subpoenaed, of which basically we only got 6 because 2 were missing and 1 had an 18-minute gap. So we really only got 6. But we got those. And that was a part of a decision that the president's rights are overcome by the need of a criminal case when he has the only source of evidence. So that makes it very different than saying, does the crime for which he's providing the evidence get immunity? But it's sure not a far step from that to say, no way he gets immunity. And Lawrence O'Donnell had a very, very brilliant analysis based in part on Justice Kavanaugh, before he was Justice Kavanaugh, but the same person, wrote a law review article basically saying that the president, as a sitting president, can't be, but looking at the 14th Amendment, post-presidency, of course he can be. He can commit crimes in office for which he can, while he's in office, he has to be impeached and tried and judged in the impeachment. But after that, whether the outcome is guilt or innocence, he can be tried in the criminal trials. So that was Justice Kavanaugh's opinion 25 years ago. And he quotes the 14th Amendment that says, this is how you can proceed. So I would say that it's pretty clear to me. It also addresses the double jeopardy issue, that it's not double jeopardy to stand trial for an impeachable offense, which is not a criminal offense. It's also
not a court of law.
It's not a court of law. It's a political decision, as opposed to a court of law and a criminal case that has to be proved to the standards of any criminal case. So I think, to me, both on the immunity from ever being tried for anything you did as president, even after you're president, and within the statute of limitations. And I would say you have to toll the statute of limitations if someone can't be tried during his presidency, that you got an extra 4 years because of that. I think the court will very quickly decide he is not immune and has no legitimate immunity or double jeopardy claim. Now, today, there's an extra problem, which is that the court is taking up a case about whether the obstruction of the congressional vote on the Electoral College, confirming the Electoral College vote, is an obstruction of a proceeding within the meaning of that particular crime. And how that decision might affect, it's not Donald Trump appealing it, it's one of the January 6th convicted felons who's raising that issue.
Yeah, look, this,
which, by the way, is post-trial.
Right, post-trial. I mean, there's so many cases swirling, not just with Donald Trump at the center, but Donald Trump involved, it's really hard to keep it's really hard to keep them all. You got to almost put it on an Excel spreadsheet. That's how crazy that this country has gotten. And now, I don't know if you saw with Hunter Biden, wanting to testify live. And I don't blame him. By the way, I don't blame him for wanting to testify publicly as opposed to privately, because what they do, and I testified publicly, as you know, once before the House Oversight Committee, right? God rest his soul, Elijah Cummings. But what people don't know is I testified privately in the skiffs before the same group of people 6 additional times, 6 more times. And what they do is at the break, they all go running out like a bunch of little squirrels. They grab a hold of their cell phones and they're texting whoever their contact is at the AP, the Times, the Post, the Washington Post, whatever it might be. And then they're all, sitting there, they're all with the phone to the side. They walk away to the side, right? And that's really what they do. So I don't blame him for doing what he's doing. And look, like my mom said, I know how Joe Biden feels right now. She goes, is it any different when, Joe was kissing Hunter on the head? He goes, that's the same thing that both, your father and I did, when you went in to deal with it. So she goes, my heart bleeds for the guy. But can I bring up something? There's another similarity to Watergate, and that's the hours of missing White House call logs from January 6th of 2020. And Jack Smith, he's really one clever son of a gun, right? He has now extracted the data from Trump's White House cell phone. In your opinion, how important do you think that call log will be to the prosecution?
So I can tell you that during Watergate, the White House daily diary and call log was very important to us. The way that we identified the tapes that we subpoenaed, for example, was based on who was meeting with who and when, what preceded it, what followed it, what actions did we have testimony happened. You have John Dean saying on March 21st, I told the president there was a cancer on the presidency. Well, of course, we looked at the conversations on March 21st, and we subpoenaed that. So it was very helpful to us in developing significant evidence, both in terms of, because there turned out to be tape recordings, that we had the actual dialogue that happened. And there's no suggestion that there is such a thing now that we'll get actual dialogue. But in terms of sequencing and being able to create a narrative that a jury will understand, it's very important. And so far, it's not clear that they have any of the substance. They just have the sequencing. Mm-hmm. But that alone is very important and will make a big difference in terms of what he was doing, particularly, let's say, in the hours after the breach of the Capitol, when he could have immediately stopped them, as he did later, but it was way too late by then. Damage had already been done. He could have stopped them. He should have stopped them. That is aiding and abetting them. It is in and of itself, it's a crime. So I think it'll be very important that they get these things and that they are able to, especially because he does not use email or text. The only way to get him is from his phone, but also my understanding is he uses, he'll grab a phone from whatever aide is standing nearby. So it's not enough to get his phone. You have to get everyone who was in any proximity to him to see if he used their phone. Now, you'd have to be able to figure out whether it was him or them making the call. But that's part of what you develop as the evidence. And people are now seeing you get in a lot of trouble if you don't cooperate. You may even get indicted. And so I think that's an issue. I want to address what you said about Hunter and how, yes, you are in a great position and your parents in a great position to know what it's like to be Joe Biden with a son who has a serious addiction problem and who clearly acted irresponsibly during that period, and who hopefully, despite the odds, will stay clean. And the odds are not with him. Very few addicts actually break addiction. I'm hoping that he has started a new life and that he can break the addiction, be one of the rare ones. But he did something very brave, probably the right thing to do, but he's deliberately thumbing his nose at Congress. He's doing what Navarro did and got indicted for, which is he stood in front of the Capitol and said, but I'm not coming in because you won't let me testify in public. And they set the rules. So he's committed a deliberate act of defiance for, as you said, I agree with you completely, for understandable reasons. It would have been put out there in bits and pieces that do not accurately reflect his testimony. They're out of context, etc. And this is one where context could make a difference, whereas anti-Semitism, I don't think does. And so he's in a tough position. I can only imagine that Congress will refer contempt charges and put Merrick Garland in a difficult position of does he prosecute or not. On the other hand, he has refused a number of prominent people, including Mark Meadows. So there's a lot of precedent for not
Jim Jordan too
going forward.
Yep, Jim Jordan as well. Look, I applaud him for taking that stand. He wants transparency. I am fighting every single day for transparency. I filed a FOIA request. FOIA comes back with that bullshit line. There are no documents that are relevant to your request. I knew they were lying because I had 4 or 5 documents in my possession. If they would have said there's 4 or 5 documents, I never would have thought twice about it. I would say, holy shit, I don't know how they did this, but they managed to do it. And none of these documents have any real relevance except that they are specific to the request. When I then brought in Mark Zaid, we filed an action. They come back, oops, you're right. There's 486,000 documents. I am now going on month 21 that the government, the FOIA office, was obligated to process a minimum of 500 documents per month. 21 months already, I have gotten 0 documents. It's 0. And every time that we try to get something, there's 9 more government agencies that have to look through the very first batch in order to see that it doesn't interfere with method and process. It's a giant FU. And that's what I appreciate of Hunter Biden. He's showing the fact that there is no real transparency between government and the people. And that's really a big problem. So, Jill, let me ask you this in furtherance. You think that Jack Smith can actually stop Trump from pushing the D.C. election fraud trial beyond Election Day? Because everybody knows, I've been saying this all along, Donald Trump's game plan is delay, delay, delay.
Yes.
That's what he wants. He wants to get it as close to November as he possibly can so that he can fight and just pretend that, it's interfering in his campaign schedule and use that as a way to, again, grift more money from his, constituents, from his supporters, but at the same time, to make himself, which he does all the time, make himself look like the victim, when in fact, many of us, myself included, are the victims of Donald's weaponization of the Justice Department, not the other way around.
Well, I may be still Pollyanna because it worked during Watergate, but this is a different Supreme Court and a different Congress. There was bipartisanship back in the Watergate era. There is none now. But I still believe that there will be justice. There will be a trial before the election. And I'm not sure where the court, if he should win re-election in November, would it be November that cuts off his being president, or would it be January when he's inaugurated? I think there's an argument that could be made for saying, as the president-elect, you can't deter him from doing his preparation for taking over the office by making him stand trial. So for safety, I would say Election Day is the cutoff. He cannot be made to be held accountable if it isn't over by then. And there's a lot of trials out there waiting to be had in sequence before that. And even without delay, it would be hard to fit all his, just criminal, because there are civil ones, but just the criminal ones. It's going to be hard, but I do believe it's possible. I do believe Judge Chutkan is up to the task and that Jack Smith is up to the task in both DC and in Florida. And of course, we have the New York DA and we have the Fulton County DA. So I think that those people are up for the challenge and will pursue it. I want to go back to your transparency for two reasons. One,
I think you mean lack of transparency.
Well, the issue of transparency.
Okay.
and the reason, it's first of all, I'm on the board of the Better Government Association, whose real mission is government transparency and FOIA. But you reminded me of the fact that when I was writing my book, which was, I started in 2008, but I really got serious a few years later after Trump was elected. I sent in a FOIA request for me because I had been a government employee and I had been cleared both by the Department of Justice and then subsequently by the Pentagon. And I had a very high security clearance. So they do a very thorough check. And so I thought, well, there might be something interesting in there that I don't remember that they found out. And so I submitted it. And of course, I got all these garbled, sometime in the future, you'll get it. I just received a disc with my FOIA information. And I by the time it came, of course, the book was already published. I haven't looked at it, but you're sort of motivating me to take a look at it and see.
Well, why are you taking a look at yours? Take a look at mine. 486.
You have too much. That's too much information. I can't. And besides, if you haven't gotten it, I'm certainly not going to get it. But mine is one disc. It's not that much. How much can you put on one disc? So
not as much.
But maybe there is nothing there. Maybe they're saying, "Oh, we haven't reviewed this yet." I don't know. But you've definitely motivated me to consider again looking at my own FOIA request.
Yeah, but I'm 21 months. Any one of those documents would show how an unconstitutional remand, first time, it's a case of first impression that a United States citizen gets remanded to prison because he fails or refuses to waive a First Amendment constitutional right. And I can't get any of the documents. When they said that there are no documents and then ultimately, oops, we made a mistake, 486,000? I don't know. That's a hell of a mistake.
That isn't a mistake. That has to have been deliberate, obviously. And it is astounding. But honestly, without seeing even one single document, you're being remanded on the grounds you were remanded is also astounding. And the First Amendment obviously had a different meaning in that administration than it has ever had before or since.
And sadly, if he returns to the White House, you could rest assured that what he did to me was a practice run. He wanted to see what he can do, how far he can get away with something. Now he has the broken play, right? Think of it like a football game. He is the broken play. Couple of tweaks here, couple of new maneuvers there. Next thing you know, he starts sending everybody with violations. And that was one of the reasons that I'm fighting as hard as I am, because something that I've regularly said, and I will continue to say it, I don't want what happened to me to happen to you. To anybody that has spoken ill of him, that he's angry with, you're going to have guys like Mike Davis, you're going to have MAGA Mike Johnson, you're going to have Kash Patel, you're going to have a Steve Bannon, a Steve Miller, a Jason Miller. You're going to have all these maniacs in power over there, and the rest of us are going to be like sitting duck. It's a scary proposition.
Since his campaign is, "I am your retribution."
Yep.
You are obviously on target as to what the future would hold. for anyone in a position of power who has criticized him at any point in their life.
Yep, and he's pissed about it. So can I move on for a second to the Georgia RICO case? Is set to begin in August. More plea deals are expected as the trial gets closer, but the case is expected to go into 2025. What do you think of Fani Willis's strategy here? I don't particularly like it. Is a RICO case too risky in your opinion?
No, I think RICO is very appropriate, and she has the experience with RICO, successful experience, that would give me confidence that she knows exactly what she's doing. And we have seen some pretty major defendants flip and cooperate. And you're certainly going to see others start to cooperate. So I think it's fine. I don't know why they think it would go into 2025 because, I mean, the Watergate case, we tried October, November, December, even with all the holidays, and had a verdict on January 1st. And that was with many defendants and many counts and involving the president, not as a defendant, but as an unindicted co-conspirator. So and juries really do better when they get a concise and clear narrative. If you confuse them with too much stuff, I just wonder. So I think it could be if she started in August. I mean, you do have the problem of August, September, October, November's the election. You're going to have to get a lot out of the way.
By the way, you just took the words right out of my mouth because the closer you get to November, the more he's going to claim he's the victim of the Biden weaponized Department of Justice. I love his deflection. It's the name of my book, Revenge: How Donald Trump Weaponized the United States Department of Justice against his critics. He's now making the same argument. It's the Biden administration that's weaponizing the DOJ against your favorite, the best president ever. Right? I mean, that's what he's doing. He's making himself into the victim, and all of his maggots just seem to, fall, they just seem to do it. And what drives me crazy here, right, is the case is expected to go to 2025. I mean, he'll already, at that point in time, will already know. This only works, by the way, if he loses. It doesn't work if he wins the election. In fact, if he wins the election, there's no doubt in my mind, zero, that Fani Willis is going to end up getting a knock on her door from the Trump police, and they will do to her exactly what Donald had done to me. There's no doubt in my mind. And everybody's like, oh, come on, it's hyperbolic. You're just being you, Michael, bombastic and full of shit. I'm telling you right off the bat, all laws go out the door. And he is going to be furious because he'll say, that she deserves it. They were using government money to come after me, blah, blah, blah. The whole thing was the witch hunt, blah, blah, blah again. Donald will go after every single person. And this country is going to be thrown into turmoil like we've never seen before. I was also thinking, let's assume hypothetically he loses, right? Which technically he should. Think about what he's going to do then. Think about the angst and the anger that he's going to portray, right? That he's going to claim and have his supporters sort of do their shtick, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which is worse, if he wins or loses.
Well, I would say that's an easy answer, that winning would be worse because of the power that comes with the office and the damage that he could do. On the other hand, I do believe that he has captured a large number of people. I don't know exactly how many I would say it is. I don't think it's all of the people who voted for him, but certainly at least half of the people who voted for him. So let's say 35, 40 million people are totally in his thrall. They believe anything he says. They believe he is the victim. They believe that Biden is an evil man. They believe his accusation, this whole thing with the impeachment, that he paid, he took a bribe to fire the prosecutor general in Ukraine. Total nonsense. No evidence to support it, and evidence quite to the contrary that the Department of State and all our allies wanted that prosecutor fired because he was not prosecuting the people he should have been prosecuting. But you can't say that to a MAGA supporter. They believe him. They believe so many things. I just had a conversation with someone who said that she was not for Trump, but she also wasn't for Biden. Why wasn't she for Biden? Because he believes in abortion until birth, and because he makes her lie by calling someone by their chosen gender when they were born a different gender. And those are the reasons she's against Biden, which aren't true things, number one. But when we are in an existential crisis, when, as you've pointed out, democracy could end and a dictatorship take place, I'm sure that the good citizens of Germany all said, oh, it can't happen here. We don't have to worry. And they did nothing. And Hitler, one step at a time, eliminated certain rights. And before they stopped, every right had been taken away, and it was too late for anybody. So I do worry seriously about the importance of this election and of getting out the vote, and of motivating people to get their friends to vote, not just them to vote. But this should be the biggest turnout that has ever happened in American history. It has to be a huge percentage.
I totally agree with you. So can I ask you, because you just brought it up, I mean, look at like the Texas Supreme Court, since we're talking about rights. The Texas, by the way, let me just go back to something that you just said. Why does she care about somebody who wants to be called a he born a she, or a she born a, why is everybody in everybody's business today? I mean, well, they share the same bathroom. No, they don't. Oh, well, now they're participating in sports. Okay. Let's turn around and say, is that the specific issue that makes you into a one-issue voter? Yeah. Let's talk about, for example, the Texas Supreme Court denying a woman a medically necessary abortion for a non-viable fetus. This is how sick that the far right has gotten now. Republicans told us that the ACA was going to dictate our health care, and now it's the courts. Yeah. Tell me, will these horrific decisions help the Democrats at the ballot box, or simply just solidify Republican control over the red states?
I think it will definitely motivate young voters, women voters, old and young. I think that the pain of, and there are actually two Texas cases. Cox is the one who has now fled the state to have a procedure because it would affect her health long term. And she was carrying a fetus that would have died when it was delivered. But there is another woman who has been denied an abortion, who is carrying a non-viable fetus, and the court is making the decision, no, she can't have it. And that's wrong, and I think it will certainly motivate people to maintain the rights that we used to have. I grew up in an era of Roe, and I want to go back to that era. And, when this person said to me these two things, I said, well, first of all, you're totally wrong. Democrats believe in abortion until viability, as the Roe court had decided. And then I said, and have you ever met a transgender person? Or do you know a friend of yours who has a transgender child? And she said, no. And I said, well, I know both. And in the same way that knowing a same-sex marriage couple will influence how you feel about same-sex marriage and makes it acceptable to Americans, I believe that as more and more people find out who they didn't even know was transgender, or find children of their friends transitioning, it will change their opinion. I have one friend whose daughter became her son, and who was suicidal as a daughter, and in part because she was in the wrong body, is now in a very happy, loving relationship and is no longer suicidal. She dropped out of school, but is going back now. And so I think when you know the real life stories of these people, it might change people's perceptions of what it means. And I mean, I don't have all the answers, but I do think that this is an existential election in terms of just democracy. And I think we have to reduce it. I think you're right. If we reduce it to issues like, how would you feel if you or your child were going to become septic because they couldn't get an abortion? And these are happening all the time. How septic do you have to be? I have a friend who's a gynecologist. At what point do you say the patient's life is in danger? How dangerously close to death do they have to be before they can have an abortion? That's the issue that should not exist. That should be a medical decision without fear that they will lose their medical license or their rights to practice medicine in any hospital.
It's more than that, Jill. It's not just rights to practice. In Texas, they can criminally prosecute you for murder. If you help, then you become a conspirator to a murder charge. If I gave to this young lady, Cox, $1,000 and told her, hey, go to Georgia, right? And so on. I am now complicit in assisting in the murder of this fetus. I can end up going to jail for murder. I mean, it is out of control how they have now involved themselves into decisions between the man and the woman, ultimately deciding for the woman what's best for her. I mean, to me, I'm blown away. But they don't want to talk about things like, Supreme Court Justices Clarence Thomas or Samuel Alito accepting luxury vacations from billionaires, right? Hearing cases before the screen. None of this is really, really important, right? Because there's some benefit to these billionaires to have people like Thomas and Alito kind of in their pocket, right? With these federal wealth tax and so on. Right. These whole issues, none of that climate change, not important to them. Clean water, not important. Affordable health care, not that important. But you know what is important? What you decide to do. And instead, they're kind of forcing people into these back alley procedures, which I don't have to tell you, this caused the death and the inability to carry on so many women. I mean, I don't even know how to describe the anger that I have when I have a 28-year-old daughter. And every time I think that my daughter has less rights than my mother, than my grandmother, I have a real problem with that.
It's definitely a problem. And one of the solutions is the Equal Rights Amendment, which definitely needs to be signed into the Constitution and which I believe has met all the tests to be included. And there is supposed to be a big protest march in DC today, as we are recording this, to get him to order the Archivist of the United States to publish the Equal Rights Amendment, and that would make it part of our Constitution. And right now, women are they're only mentioned once, and that's in the 19th Amendment that gives women the right to vote. Other than that, every reference is to man. It is not to people. It's not to women. It's just to men. And I'm sick and tired of not being part of the Constitution. I believe the Equal Rights Amendment is the answer to a lot of the things, including the abortion issue, the choice issue. And I'm hoping that at some point there will be an outcome. It's certainly worth a lot of discussion to get that problem solved and to make sure that your daughter does have equal rights. That stuff that happened to me when I was in law school, applying for jobs, the kind of questions I was asked, that you would be astounded at things that were said to me. Well, we can't hire you because everybody else is a man in the office and there's travel involved, and we can't possibly let you travel with another person who's a man. I mean, that was said to my face. And the Equal Rights Amendment would stop that. It would stop it. It would stop all of this nonsense about women are lesser. We are not. And I'm just hoping that the protest goes forward peacefully and significantly and gets a lot of attention.
Those protests should go on in every single state. Let Biden and others know that it's real, it's here, and it needs to be handled. But Jill, if I could say, you and I are both Jewish, right? And I'm sure that you're feeling the same that I am, the negative effects of the anti-Semitism that's accelerated since the war in Gaza began. That said, how do you feel that Biden has handled Israel so far? There are so many mixed bags going on right now. The sympathy for Gaza is clearly growing. They're winning. I don't care what anybody says. They're certainly winning the PR campaign. I'm curious how you feel Biden's handling Israel and Netanyahu.
That is such a tough question because, I grew up, I'm old enough that Israel was just being founded when I was a child. And I used to put dimes in a little book with a tree so that you filled the tree out and you planted a tree in Israel. And right now, the government of Israel is not the government that was there at the founding, that had the principles that I believed were right. It has swung very right, not correct, but to the right. And I'm not sure that they would even allow me to become an Israeli citizen. It wouldn't be an escape from anti-Semitism elsewhere because I am a non-practicing Jew. I was raised conservative, and now I'm even less than that. And it's the Orthodox that are being taken in. So I'm disturbed by the government and by Netanyahu's attempts to get rid of the Supreme Court, and am concerned about the intelligence that seems to suggest that he knew and did not stop the invasion. But even with all of that said, what Hamas did, and I separate Hamas from the Gazans, although, of course, the Gazans have not risen in protest or demanded an election and have allowed Hamas to rule without election for, 16 years now? Mm-hmm. So there is some responsibility for them not acting to get rid of the government. But even still, what they did is so horrendous. And I also worry about, for example, going back to the woman issue, using rape as a weapon of war.
Where's the outcry? Where's the outcry?
Where is the outcry? But there was a lot of rape in Ukraine by the Russian soldiers.
I brought that up the other day on television.
So where's the outcry for that?
I don't know.
That was horrible. So I don't know that that's always just anti-Semitic because the Ukrainians aren't Jewish who were being raped. Mm-hmm. And the Russians are horrible, maybe even worse than Hamas. I do feel like we have to come to some solution, and pushing the residents of Gaza into the south and then invading the south of Gaza is a recipe for losing public support. And you're right. Right now, probably because of anti-Semitism, the Israeli state is being held to a different standard. And it's sort of like what happened with the 3 presidents of Ivy League schools testifying. And I think Bret Stephens had one of the best columns on this, which was, it's the hypocrisy. What you can say against Black people, what you can say against Jews. Oh yeah, you can do that. You can say, eliminate the Jews from the river to the sea, which to me is a code word for genocide. They aren't saying let's kill all the Jews, but let's push them into the sea. that's the same to me as genocide. So I think that we have to apply the same standards of the First Amendment. There's a line in the First Amendment. At some point, you do not get First Amendment protection if you yell fire in a theater. Everybody knows that. Well, if you yell genocide to a crowd in Gaza, that's the same thing as yelling fire in a theater. If you yell, something against blacks, and that's not allowed, but the genocide of Jews is allowed, it's simply hypocrisy. And so we need to get the rules right, that you can say neither and apply the same standard to all woke statements. I'm not even sure I know what woke means, honestly, Michael. But I feel like we need a lot more public outcry about what happened to Israel. And I think the press has to be more careful in using words like occupation. Gaza is not occupied, hasn't been for many years. They had their own independent government. Yes, in the West Bank, there is some occupation. That's a different issue. That's not who attacked Israel and not who Israel is fighting back against. So I think we need to get our language straight. And the word occupation really bothers me, because what occupation means in that situation is Israel should not exist. They are occupying my land, say the Palestinians of the past. But that's long past. The Palestinians were allowed to stay. Many left, but they were allowed to stay. And the country was given to form the state of Israel, the country of Israel. And there's just no occupation involved anymore. So I think, we need to be careful in words that we use in describing what happened and in giving proportionality in terms of the number of people killed by Hamas and taken hostage and raped, or just kept as hostage. That number equates to many more 9/11s than our 9/11 because of our population and size difference versus theirs. It's proportionally the same. And so I think that we have to really think about, well, we responded, didn't we? And they're responding to a direct attack. I think Israel has a right to defend itself, but it has to stay within the rules of war. And on iGen Politics, I've had two experts on the rules of war come on to describe what that means, because I think people don't it seems like, well, how can war have rules? Well, it does.
No, it does.
And it does. And it should. It should. I mean, there shouldn't be war. It's stupid.
none of this should be happening altogether. Yeah. But Jill, let me thank you for joining me again on Mea Culpa. Wish you a happy holidays, Chag Sameach, Happy New Year, the whole bit. Enjoy yourself. And again, thank you so much for speaking out and doing all the things that you're doing.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Happy Hanukkah.
Thank you so much.